time ago, the population of the world became so large that people kept bickering. Nobody would get along. There was constant fighting and dissension. There were people who genuinely wanted to make the world a better place, but because of their eagerness, were making it worse. Then there were the people who believed that everyone should be free to live as they want to live freely and not be judged for what they think. But as a result of not being unified, there was no progress. The nation as a whole just could not find common ground. So people decided to split up into many small different countries. And since there were so many available islands, some people got on ships. They were a diverse people that all had common ground and the same vision when it came to what they wanted to get done. They figured to make progress, people would have to start putting their minds together, and if they didn't unify, then no progress would be made. So splitting up into small populations would ensure that people with the same mindset, but maintaining their uniqueness, in order for there to still be new points of view, they would need to be able to work together, or at least spend more time working together, since they had that common ground. There was a small group of people who were farmers, and they had known about an island. This group of people were special because most of them owned Shiba Inus. One of the new people, called Roxanne, had a handsome Shiba Inu passed down to her from her late father. That Shiba's name was Odin, and what made him very special is that he was a ratter. You see, the island was filled with rodents, and as Roxanne got older, people that were living on the island with her bartered with her so they could breed their Shibas with her Shiba, Odin. He just had that natural demeanor and above average hunting capability and skill set that was above average for a Shiba Inu. And so he bred descendants who were warriors and fantastic hunters. All the Shibas on the island, which was a pretty large island to say the least, had grown accustomed to life by the water. Especially Odin's descendants, who were not only very great swimmers, but also very fast runners. And there was sort of a divide with the Shibas that the owners didn't even realize was happening. The Shibas who were the descendants of Odin had an air of superiority over the Shibas who were not. And so they divided themselves up into classes. They set laws in place that only the highest pedigree Shibas, who were the best hunters, who had Odin's DNA, would get special privileges and respect within the packs. There was one female Shiba Inu who was very sought after, who was very beautiful. Her name was Darling. Darling is what you could call a fierce warrior and an amazing ratter. She single-handedly took out so many rodents. And it got to the point that with her reign, and within her generation, the invasive rodents dwindled down to a population that was manageable. Just enough for the wild animals of this fairly large island to live off of, but also small enough and manageable enough so they weren't a problem. The crops that the humans planted were now saved. The humans, seeing this, wanted to breed Darling. But no matter what they did, even though Darling went into heat several times, she just would not breed with any of the high-end Shibas. As a matter of fact, she didn't breed with any of them in general. They just seemed all beneath her. Something didn't feel right. So the Shiba started to exclude her, even though she was technically part of the elites, being a descendant of Odin. But she found herself straying away from the whole cliche cliques of the Shiba Inu's class of elites and otherwise. And to get away, she would go deep in the forest. Now, there had been rumors of a species of wolf living here. People would come from other places and bring creatures from the mainland to these islands. So since it was a very large island, there were actually a lot of animals that were brought here or migrated here. This species of wolf was probably evolving here for many, many years. Not to mention, there were people who came to this island before who brought their dogs. The Shibas got wind of this and they just thought it was so cool because they were told that they were the closest in DNA match to the wolf than any other breed of dog. It would explain why many of them still had their very wild demeanor and hunting instincts and personalities. And Darling was very much like this. Hearing about the rumor, the humans understandably were very worried about their Shibas. And for good reason too, because some of the Shibas started disappearing. Shibas normally would know when to run away, but because a lot of these guys were warriors, a lot of them stood and fought. So the Shibas all agreed that they would not venture into the woods without a pack. But not Darling. Oh no, because she was above everybody else. When she was by herself, she never really felt that way. She said that as a defense mechanism, or acted that way because, well, the others always felt threatened by her. It was really nothing she did. It wasn't technically her fault. But she figured that since they acted that way towards her, she would just become the monster that they thought she was. And as she was walking deep into the woods one day, she heard a growl behind her. And as she turned around, she was beside herself to see what was standing there. It was a wolf. One of the wolves from this island. Instead of running away, Darling snarled and she growled and she puffed out her fur, snarling right back at it. This wolf didn't seem to have a pack, or maybe he did. It licked its lips and then inched closer to her. "What do you want?" Darling asked as though she weren't afraid. In truth, she was. "You're pretty brave for such a little dog," he said. "Little dog?" "Little dog?" Darling rhetorically asked him, not caring 1 ounce for her well-being. "Are you not little? And are you not a dog?" He retorted. "Maybe compared to you I may be little, but I have a lot of fight. So I dare you to come near me." Darling knew in her hearts of hearts that she'd probably die in that moment, but she was not going to back down from a fight. She would rely on her intelligence and her speed to try and outwit and outmaneuver this large animal. But the truth is, as she looked at his pulsing muscles, his large shaggy coat, his very long nose and his sharp eyes and ears, this animal has been surviving in these jungles and these forests longer than she has. He is truly, by all definition, a wild animal. "That's cute. How about we prove that theory?" he said as he growled and then lunged towards her. With her great reflexes, Darling jumped out of the way. The wolf chased her around several trees, and she used her agility to jump up the palm trees and basically climb them, like a cat. The wolf creature was not fazed by this, however. He's hunted a few animals who have run up these trees, and so he started shaking it for her to come down. He can only climb a little of the way up before sliding back down because of his mass. "Sooner or later, you have to come down, little dog." Darling was planning every other maneuver that she could think of. She was so accustomed to being the hunter that she had to kind of reverse engineer all of the things that she's learned now that she was the hunted. She's never had to evade like this before, and she actually put up a really good fight, at least when it came to evading him and tiring him out, and she tried to use the environment to her advantage. For the longest while this wild wolf thing was chasing after her, it never even occurred to her to ask the other Shibas for help. At that moment, she was still by the shore, so she could have called out and asked the other Shibas for help, but she never thought about it. And while it finally did come to her to do that, she opted not to because in her mind, the other Shibas didn't like her anyway, so why would they help her? At long last, she lost the wolf. She was panting so loudly, her hackles were standing up, she was so scared. She's never been this deep out into the forest or jungle before, or of the island, and so she was very afraid, and she was afraid she wasn't going to be able to find her way back. And all she had to do was smell the ocean, and where it was strongest, she knew that she was closest to the shore, but there were so many different scents that she's never smelled before that she got kind of turned around. And she was like, you know what? I'm already running in this direction. If I run back there, I might run into the wolf, so let me turn around and continue going in the direction that I was already going to find some place to hide. But to her horror, as she turns around in the dark, there's something in the dark just standing there, and it's revealed to be the wolf. "Hi, little dog," he said menacingly, his teeth bared. He chomps around her neck and uses his body weight to straddle her on the ground. Poor Darling kicks up dust and sand everywhere. Rocks are flying as this creature has its jaws around her neck, squeezing tighter and tighter. At first, Darling was crying and squealing, but then she decided that to her grave, she was going to be strong and she was not going to have any fear. The tongue sticking all the way out of her head, on the verge of suffocating, with this wolf squeezing its jaws around her throat, she decided, you know what? You know what? Kill me. Go ahead. Do it slow, do it fast, I do not care. But I refuse to let you take my courage away from me. The wolf didn't like this, so of course, he let her go. It wasn't fun. "Oh, I'm not done with you yet. This is too fun. You know what? I'll do one even better. Why don't you try to make a run for it and see if I can catch you?" Darling did just that, using the opportunity she was given by the wolf as he let her go to run as fast as she could. And he did this with her for several times during the night. And every time she would run away, thinking she got closer to the shore, the wolf would be right there in front of her. He was so silent, she didn't even hear him. Running after her, did he teleport? What was the deal with that? It was very freaky. His bright purple coat seemed to blend in perfectly with the night environment. Even though Darling could see better than most of the Shiba Inus, in the dark especially, she could not see this guy until he was right up close next to her. At the last moment, when she was beyond frustrated, she bit him on his nose and furiously fought him. Of course, this didn't bother him much. It hurt only a little bit, but he was just so taken aback and kind of impressed with the little dog's prowess. He didn't tell her that, of course, he had killed other Shiba Inus before. As a matter of fact, many of the missing Shiba Inus were because of him, and that of some of the other wolf members. But after their bravery wore off, at some point, through his cat and mouse game, ironically, they would start squealing and begging for their lives. But not Darling. Darling would keep her ferocity. He wanted to see how long it would take until she broke. So for several days, he kept this game going. He led her to places to drink, gave her a false sense of security, and then forced her to fight for her life to escape again. And every time he had her, his jaws around her throat again to suffocate her, she would goad him into killing her. She was not scared, she didn't care, she just was not scared. This impressed the wolf, and honestly, he just wanted to get it over and done with. It's been a few days now, and this dog physically was starting to give. She was dehydrated, she was hungry, her fur was starting to fall out from all the stress, and the more he tried to toy with her psychologically is the more aggressive she got towards him, but not afraid. As a matter of fact, it wasn't just the less afraid she seemed to be, it was also like she was feral, and this impressed him. He felt as though it would not be fun if he just killed her. So he thought, you know what? Let's just play a new game. Let me pretend to be her friend and see how long that goes. So the large wolf decided to be her friend. As she was cornered up against a tree, trying to find her way back through the jungle again, she started hunting, and the wolf would hide in the trees and watch her. Her huntsmanship was a work of art. He's seen other wolves hunt in packs or by themselves, but none like this. How did the little toy wolf end up being able to hunt like this? It was truly amazing. And for her size, she was actually really strong. Not stronger than him, of course, but for her size. He befriended her and introduced himself as Scion. She would not talk to him, and for weeks, he tried to gain her trust. He'd even bring her food, show her where the water was. And of course she didn't trust him because he tried to do all this stuff before and it was a game to him. But after she started to give a little bit and asked, "Why are you helping me?" "Because I find you fascinating," in a pitiful kind of way, was his response. He did plan on killing her. He thought that if he made this dog so infatuated with him, he thought the ultimate betrayal would totally broke her, and he would be able to look into her eyes as she felt fear and pain for the first time by him, and showing her, since she thought she was as good as him, that would be the way to do it. But what he did not count on was actually starting to like her. The first time she was amused at something he said, the first time she play bowed at him, or do that tackle butt thing that he's never seen any other canine on the island do, actions that were very puppy-like. It was very weird and strange behavior. He just couldn't help it. He just could not any longer imagine a life without her. So he became her friend, legitimately. She asked about his kind, but he would keep them away because they were all scared of him. He was the largest, but he was also a lone wolf. So in short, there was a branch of wolves who were the ancestors that gave rise to the creatures who were the ancestors that eventually gave rise to the domestic dogs and thus the Shiba Inu breeds. That very ancient ancestor, or at least a small segment of them, split off from the rest and evolved on this island separately. A long time ago, other Shiba Inus like her had come to the island or were brought to the island, and a few of them were left there, and they interbred with the wolves on the island, and he and his kind are the result of that. When Darling was pregnant with her first litter of pups, Scion would basically dote on her and keep bringing her food, make sure she was okay. But one day, as the evening set in, and he went to go find food, she heard growling outside in the distance. It sounded like several canines, much larger than she was. It turns out they were some of the other wolves on the island. The 3 ferocious wolves were very large, and they surrounded the den, making noises that Darling has never heard another canine make before. She couldn't understand their language. They clearly had different dialects, which made her wonder how come Scion could understand her. They howled and were very ferocious. Darling knew that they were up to no good, and she growled right back, ready to defend her territory. One of the wolves stuck his head in and pulled her out by the neck. Darling stuck out all 4 of her legs, trying to pull herself back inside of her den, her pregnant belly scraping along the bottom of the den where pebbles and stones were sticking out of. She would die if these wolves managed to bring her outside. She kind of moved her face to the side as she was being dragged and bit the wolf on his snout. He let back momentarily in surprise at her ferocity, and then he dove back down and used his large jaws to drag her out again, and this time she was slipping. He was gonna pull her out, and if he managed to pull her out, all these wolves would tear her to shreds. Darling tried to push herself deeper and deeper back into the den with her back up against the wall, but the wolf dug in, the other wolves cheering him on, and he finally was able to get into the den. For the first time in what seemed like a very long time, Darling was actually afraid. Not so much for her own life, but because of her pups. This was her first pregnancy, and she knew that these little babies inside of her meant the world to her. She had no idea why, but she just knew that she wanted to protect them. And she knew that once they were born, she would give her life to protect them. But if she gave her life now, they would never be born, and she would have failed as a mother. The wolf hauntingly stared at her, his teeth bared. And that was it. She was cornered, and he opened his jaws up very wide, snapping at her, and as he pushed himself, his back end still hanging outside the den, he now drew himself closer and was about to put his dangerously sharp teeth over her soft little neck and drag her out so he and his friends could tear her apart. Something stopped him though. He yelped really loud in front of Darling's face and said nothing. His mouth was just hanging open, and he just kept on yelping and started whining, and he started moving backwards until Darling realized something or someone was pulling him back from out of the den. As he got farther away from her, she could see the light pouring in from outside, and she realized what was happening. Scion was back, and he fought the other two wolves and was now protecting her by pulling this wolf out of the den. Scion fought viciously. The black wolf was actually caught off guard when he got pulled out from the den and was just sitting on his haunches for a while because he was kind of thrown off balance, and then he realized what he was looking at. He recognized Scion. Scion was actually much larger than he was. The black wolf had fear that flashed in his eyes for a quick moment. Darling had poked her head outside of the den just enough to look at the action. The other two wolves looked at her and went straight for the den. She growled at them. But before they could make their move, Scion was right there to back them off before they could even get close to the den. The both of them were terrified of him. After they both yelped and kind of put their tail between their legs and ran off just to watch the fight from some distance away, it didn't take very long for Scion to win this fight against their leader. He tore out a chunk of his flesh out of the top of his back, which sent this black wolf sailing away in utter defeat and shame. Scion stood with all four legs spread wide apart, his hair raised up on every end of his body, his ears still lowered, his teeth and his fangs, much larger than theirs, bared. He let out a mighty howl, warning the other wolves to dare ever come back and touch his female or his territory again. Darling, shaking, emerged from out of the den and nuzzled Scion. That was the last they would ever see of these wolves. Deep inland, Scion and Darling had become officially a mated pair. It didn't take long before Darling gave birth to 3 beautiful pups, Ajay, Janner, and their third pup, Bjorn. Bjorn was different from his other siblings. He started off being very small, around the same size as they were. He was much fluffier and seemed to have a bigger build than his brothers in general. They used to make fun of him for being smaller, but then as time went on, and they started to realize, much to their dismay, as male dogs, or wolf dogs for that matter, that Bjorn had gotten much bigger than they were, being the same age, and not eating any more than they were. Ajay and Janner were like regular dogs, and from the outside world, they looked like regular Shiba Inus. They used to find their way to the shore, despite what their mother had told them, now staying completely away from humans and the rest of Shiba society, and they would go to the shore because they would remember the stories that their mom told about this other Shiba society. And when the Shiba Inu saw these pups running out of the forest, they were a bit larger. They looked like Shiba Inus, but they were much, much larger, especially for their age. At 4 months old, they were the size of and looked very much like adult Shiba Inus, or rather bigger. They loved playing, they loved practicing their hunting. Their tails were also longer as well. They would always go deeper into the forest to go explore and to practice hunting. And for the most part, they could catch food on their own. Their father and mother had taught them well, so they were capable of feeding themselves, at least for now. As they went out to hunt, the pups noticed that it was taking a while for their father to get back. He always hunts and patrols anyway. They had come back looking for their mom and told her that they heard their dad, but he sounded far away, and it sounded like he was fighting something big. Their mother told them not to worry about it because she had complete confidence that Scion could handle anything. It would take her 2 days to make peace with the fact that Scion was dead. There was a very awful smell on the wind, and she followed that scent because it smelled like Scion. Unfortunately, she could not find his body because it was right in the territory of those wolves. Darling would still wait on the edge of this territory. She wouldn't care if the wolves saw her, and she would howl for her love. She would pace, knowing the truth, but still hoping somewhat just to see his body to make sure and have closure. After the rain finally poured down and washed away the scent, there was barely a hint of it left. Darling had to finally decide to literally give up the ghost and return home and mourn. For Ajay and Janner, their lives didn't really change that much. Their father was influential in their lives early on, but most of the time he was out patrolling and hunting. Their mother was the one, since she was a great hunter, really instilled all that hunting prowess inside of them. So they weren't as close with their father. However, who was close with their father was poor Bjorn. Bjorn had the closest relationship with his father, and he would talk to him about things. The both of them would actually take walks together before the father told him to go back home because he couldn't leave the certain perimeter that the father had sprayed to mark where his perimeter was and around the den. Bjorn heard his mother talking to his brothers, saying that at some point they might want to integrate themselves back with the elite Shibas and the rest of human society, which has grown a little bit because more people were coming to the island. She didn't want to do this, but for the puppy's sake and knowing those wolves would eventually come back, once all of them started realizing that the area wasn't as protected as before, she just didn't want to put her puppies in danger. This made Bjorn feel sad because he didn't know that life, and he somehow knew that if that happened, everything would be different and not for the better. So yes, he felt very lonely because the only person he seemed to have connected with is his father. He looked mostly like his father. He was the largest puppy out of his litter. He had more of his wild and yet quiet tendencies that his father had. His brothers thought he was weird. They never wanted to play with him. They just made fun of him because he was different. They used to make fun of him because he was smaller. Now they make fun of him because he's larger. They make fun of him because he smells different. He just felt very alone, and he wanted so much to just have their approval and play with his brothers. One night, they went out of the den while their mother was sleeping to go and explore. This was something that Ajay and Janner always did together, and their mom would tell them these bedtime stories when they were very little pups about how there were some strange monsters, these demonic, strange entities that were very large and had large teeth and hulking bodies and lurked in these deep, dark woods. She would call that place the Black Gully, and they were always so terrified to go in there. Like, they were really good hunters by this time, even though they're still puppies, but that was the one place that they never went. But they was always joke with each other. They would always go around the territories and just stare at this deep, black gully area. It's just a place where not even their night vision could see. As they were doing their thing, they heard somebody behind them, and they're like, I bet you it's him. So they hid, and then tried to sneak up on their brother, which didn't really work too much, because they were much louder than he was, so he'd already seen them anyway, and he could also smell them. And they tried scaring him, like, what's up, Bjorn? How are you doing? Bjorn said nothing much, just wanted to hang out with you guys. I mean, we don't really ever hang out with each other. Ajay and Janner kind of look at each other and joke around because now they're ready to play a game. And they're like, oh, you want to hang out with us? All right then. Well, to hang out with us, there's something you have to do first. You have to prove your worth in order to hang out with us. So of course, poor Bjorn is like, I'll do anything. I can prove my worth. What do you want me to do? So the evil pups are like, you know that black gully that mom's always talking about? Yeah. You've got to prove that you're brave enough. You've got to go in there. Bjorn, feeling desperation just to be accepted by his brothers, is like, I can go in there. But won't mom be mad? Yeah, but mom's not here right now. And that's what you gotta do to roll with us, so if you're too scared though. So as Bjorn is about to go, he tries to turn around to his brothers and he's like, have you gone in there? The both of them lied, just outright lied, is like, yeah, we've gone in there. Mom doesn't know, but we rolled together and we're warriors. We can call each other's warriors because we've been in the Black Gully, so it was really good. Hearing this, Bjorn, impressionable Bjorn, decides to go into the forest in the Black Gully, where not even light touches. After entering, Ajay and Janner are just terrified. At first they're laughing, but now they're really worried because they didn't actually think Bjorn was gonna go in there. They thought he was gonna chicken out and just run away, but they see his little body disappearing into the forest, and they're thinking to themselves, oh no, what are we gonna tell Ma? Like, we didn't actually expect that he was gonna go in there. I mean, he's bigger than they are, but Bjorn is still considered their little brother. They're supposed to look after him, and she would never forgive them if anything happened. Sure, they could lie, but she'd probably find out. So Ajay is like, should we get him out? Janner's thinking, no, he's gonna come back, but he doesn't. And before they can call out to Bjorn, they're just waiting. They're like, let's wait for a little while and see what happens. And they both freeze because they see something. The light kind of hits the trees differently, so that part of the gully that Bjorn went into is kind of illuminated on the one side. And as they can see through it, there's a little distance on a tree line that's kind of like the perimeter to that little black gully area, and they can see something in the distance. They're trying to call out to Bjorn, but they don't want to make too much noise. They're saying, Bjorn, come back, come back. But Bjorn is like, what is going on? And he actually sees it. He saw it before, but he didn't process what it was. He just thought it's just an animal, a tiny animal of some sort, because it was some distance away, so his perception, his depth of perception, kind of fooled him for a minute, and he thought it was actually something smaller, closer, when it was actually something larger, farther away. So instinctively, Bjorn goes behind a tree, as his brothers are trying to get his attention, and because Bjorn is hiding, and the only thing that's moving in the direct line of sight to this thing are the two pups, Ajay and Janner, the thing sees them, and that thing is a bear. How a bear got on this island, no one knows. But here it is. And as soon as it looks at them, it turns its head, its eyes are glowing, and it starts growling. And Ajay and Janner are just freaking out. This bear, this large creature that they've never seen before, just starts barreling towards them. And the thing is huge. They can actually feel the ground shaking as it comes towards them. And it closes the distance so fast that the pups almost soil themselves. They had no idea what to do. They were just running, and these two warrior dogs that thought they were so big and bad, that thought they were the bee's knees, were just running for their lives. And it made sense because this thing was like 5 times their size. As the bear's running, it gets close enough to one of the pups and quickly charges one of them and knocks them onto their side. Poor Ajay is just lying there in terror, struggling to get back up on his 4 feet and run. He is face to face with a bear who's about to bite down on him. Janner is just whining and crying in the distance because he thinks he's going to see his brother get killed. Right before the bear chomps down, there is a blur that knocks Ajay out of the way. And when Ajay looks back, after he finds his feet and runs away back to his brother, they both look on and see that it's Bjorn. It's Bjorn who's facing off against this bear. Right in front of it, his tail up, growling at it menacingly. The bear's never had this happen to him before, and it causes him to be even more ferocious. After the bear is shocked for a moment, it roars incessantly and in a fit of rage. Who dares to challenge this bear? This is his territory, and this thing in front of him is merely prey. This bear has evolved on this island to easily dispatch animals like this, but Bjorn does not care. All he sees is red, because all he knows is that this thing is trying to hurt his family, and he will die to protect them. He doesn't even understand the concept of what death is. Like his mother and like his father, his warrior nature is through the roof. The bear growls at him, and he growls back, challenging the bear to make a move. The bear roars even louder, expecting that Bjorn is going to run away, but Bjorn does not. He stands his ground, looks dead in the bear's eye. The bear aggressively lunges at Bjorn, standing up on his hind legs and swiping at him. And in every move, Bjorn leaps out of the way, but every time he dodges the bear's swipe or bite or charge, he comes right back in front of the bear's face, as if taunting him, as if to say, "I'm not going anywhere. I'm not afraid of you. You can try and hurt me all you want, but you're not hurting my brothers." Bjorn somehow instinctively knows that if he runs away, this bear is going to chase them, and it's so large that it covers way more ground than they do. They are still technically puppies, so Bjorn does not back down. His brothers watch on in horror, and also in amazement that their little brother, who was so shy and wanted to do everything for their approval, is now standing in front of this big demonic animal that they've never seen before, and is not even afraid. As much as they thought they were warriors, they are nothing compared to their brother Bjorn. While the bear is recovering, preparing to swipe again, getting ready to stand on its hind legs and throw its full body weight down on Bjorn, Bjorn snaps at the bear. He hangs onto its nose and thrashes wildly, also using his front paws and the claws on them to scratch at the bear's eyes. Bjorn suddenly has a very sweet memory, riding on his father's back. Wait, no, his mother's back. And now his father's back. He can't really remember whose back he was riding on, but he remembers how safe he felt. And then the dream changes, and now he's riding on the bear's back. He's controlling the bear. The bear is no longer angry. The bear and he are friends. Bjorn is cold. He's lying down and he feels so peaceful, and suddenly, looking up at the sky, he can see every star in the sky. He never even really noticed those before. Like, he's seen them, they were a part of his life, but this is the first time that he's ever seen them this bright, and so many of them. And then he knows his eyes are closed, but somehow he can still see the stars, which is very amazing. Next, he sees a vision of his mom, lying down in the sand, looking up at those same stars. She looks sad and lonely and depressed. Bjorn just wants nothing more than to hold his mom. Her tail is wrapped around her body, and she just has this dead look in her eye. She just wants everything to be okay. She wants to go back to the way things were. "Mom, it's okay," Bjorn seems to say, but his mom can't hear him. Suddenly, right after blinking, his mom is now on a cloud. Older, much older. She's sleeping on a bed of clouds. She's with the stars, and with the clouds, and with the water droplets and the dew in the morning, and everything just feels so peaceful. He's looking at his mom, getting ready to lie down and just be at peace for the final time. And while he's looking at her, he's also experiencing this beautiful relieving feeling with her. It would be the last thoughts that Bjorn has, because as he is living this dream, he has no idea that his poor fallen body is lying down, completely void of life. His brothers had been mourning over it for hours before going home and telling their mom what had happened. Bjorn actually died a long time ago. He has no idea that he has passed away, having given his life in the heat of battle, bravely and almost senselessly, to save his family. Bjorn is sailing through the galaxies. A deep voice that seems like it's coming from inside of him, but all over him at the same time. It's speaking to him, but not in the language that he's supposed to understand, but somehow he does. It tells him that this is his life now. He can go anywhere he wants, think of anywhere he wants to be. He's never even had these concepts before, but somehow he knows exactly what to ask for. Somehow he's aware that this is a galaxy, those are stars, it's a nebula, these are different universes. He suddenly knows all of that, as if at this moment in time, he doesn't know he's dead, but he is aware of everything that his body was kept limited from knowing. He just knows that. As he sails through the galaxies, he also seems to sail through time effortlessly. All he has to do is think it. One minute, he's inside the galaxy, at the center of a nucleus of a cell. The next, he is soaring through a template that a being is creating in order to form some other dimension. And so Bjorn thinks it, so it is. Now sitting on a planet very far away in another galaxy. The voice tells Bjorn, which also sounds like Bjorn's voice, but is very familiar, almost like the voice of his father as well, or a combination of all the voices that ever made him feel safe. 1 minute's his mom, 1 minute's his own voice, the next minute's his father's. It's a combination of all of those, and then it's other voices he's never heard before. Regardless, the voice seems like one entity, or all in one. It tells Bjorn that this is who he's always been. His body's only a fraction of the experience that he has gone through over countless lifetimes, timelines, and dimensions. There's so much to explore, and it's okay if he wants to choose his next journey. Bjorn chooses to go to a beautiful planet, one that he knows he's never been to before. Of course he hasn't. As far as he knows, he's only been on one planet, but somehow now, in his ethereal sense and experience, he's aware that at some point in his many timeless lives, he's been to many other planets and had many other experiences. At this current time, he still is not completely sure of what those experiences were, but he knows that it's only a fraction of the experiences that he's had. This planet is very beautiful, and it has several celestials orbiting it, one of them slightly eclipsing its star, casting a strange and very calming hue over the planet. On this planet, Bjorn witnesses many things he's never seen. Strange predatory animals, stalking their prey, plants that are actually animals, hiding in plain sight, hiding from their predators. It is enthralling as it is scary. These creatures had merged their evolution with other different creatures. As night falls and there's almost no stars in the sky, a strange flowering plant quickly erupts as a creature comes charging out of it, its mouth open, ready to tear apart Bjorn. But Bjorn quickly leaps out of the way, closes his eyes, and suddenly he is somewhere else. A little animal is lying in its nest, but its mother doesn't seem so happy that Bjorn has suddenly shown up, uninvited. She opens up her arms. Bjorn thought they were wings like a bird, but instead, they expand to show spiky protrusions on the bottoms. As she flaps her large, powerful arms, the claws make tapping noises that sounds like an explosion, and it scares Bjorn, but also fascinates him. When he doesn't move away fast enough, the mother slaps her jaws together and charges towards Bjorn, and suddenly he is somewhere else. He vaguely remembers praying mantids looking similar to this. As he wishes it, Bjorn blinks and is suddenly somewhere else. He stands still, feeling some strange vibrations in the air and on the ground. He looks to his right and sees a large creature that kind of resembles him, walking slowly and stealthily up to him. Its head is large. Its mouth is void of teeth, and when it opens its mouth close to Bjorn's head, Bjorn can feel his flesh and bones pulling towards it like a magnet, something that Bjorn has never experienced, but yet is very aware of. Maybe he has experienced it in some other life, some other time ago. Luckily, the creature doesn't see him as something to eat, and it quickly walks off somewhere else, its 4 legs never making a sound. It opens its mouth and seems to blow air through what Bjorn thought were ears in the top of its head. It's as if it's eating all the sound waves in the area. Bjorn recalls hearing his heartbeat, but as soon as that creature opened its mouth near him, all of a sudden, Bjorn couldn't hear anything at all. It was the most weird experience he's sure he's never had before, besides being through space, which wasn't even as silent, because he could still hear noises there too. It's a good thing that creature wasn't interested, and Bjorn wonders about this creature. What is it? And how is it able to eat sound waves like that? In only a moment, Bjorn thinks, only a fleeting thought, and he is suddenly at the bottom of a shallow ocean that spans for many kilometers. At the bottom of the ocean, he makes friends with a strange creature. A creature that is a mile long, and is very big in the middle and the end of its body. But its head is very tiny, and it's very friendly. Bjorn is happy, and he actually spends time with this creature at the bottom of the shallow ocean that Bjorn is very aware of that he can breathe under. I can breathe underwater, he thinks to himself. I can feel the water pushing into my lungs, and it's a very strange, pressuring feeling. He almost panics, but then instinctively he relaxes, and suddenly the water filling his lungs and him able to take a very big breath with a little bit of work to withdraw the oxygen from the area becomes effortless after a while and feels natural, and especially when sleeping. Bjorn has many adventures on this planet, but after a few days, he starts to get lonely. His howls of joy and grandiose turn into sorrowful cries for his family. He calls out to the stars in a morose song, desperate for love, for his mother and his brothers. He hadn't even thought about it, but wasn't he fighting something to protect them? And all of a sudden, he ended up here. How? At first, it seems as though Bjorn's cries were answered because he hears howling in the distance. But when he turns around, the thing that's making the noise is not one of his family members. It's a storm unlike any he's ever seen before, and it's heading straight for him. Instinctively, Bjorn runs the other way. He tries to beat the storm, and it's so fast, and as he gets past it, he feels something trying to grab his back legs. As fast as he's running, it seems to be right upon him. To Bjorn's horror, he realizes this is no ordinary storm. This storm is a creature. The storm is part of the creature, and it uses the storm to hunt and kill its prey. Bjorn can feel his legs coming up off the ground, but he digs his claws in deeper to the ground and runs away. Thankfully, the creature is still behind him, but further away. Bjorn has a faint memory as he's running for his life as the creature howls. He remembers running alongside his brother Ajay. Ajay always wanted to prove himself. Janner was ahead of them, and Bjorn remembers running past Ajay, and Ajay for that moment cheering him on. Yeah, Bjorn, you're just as fast as Dad, which made Janner in front run even harder, and he remembers that feeling of passing his brothers. Everything he did alongside his brothers was better. He was a better howler. He was a better hunter. How could he have forgotten all of that? He just wasn't aware of those things. But in that moment, he was aware that after a while, his brothers stopped hanging out with him, not because they hated him, not because they didn't believe he was good enough to be one of them, but because they didn't think they were good enough for him. It made them feel intimidated, and then it made them resent their brother. Bjorn had no idea, and he wanted nothing more than to tell his brothers how he really felt, and that he looked up to them and loved them so much. For some reason, when Bjorn was running from the storm creature thing, he couldn't go anywhere else. It's as if it prevented him from thinking, took away his dreams and his ability to travel, at least the way he had been. So he aimed for a cave. Sort of. He could actually see through the rocks ahead and see that there was a cave behind them. The rocks were sealing the entrance, and Bjorn didn't have time to move all those rocks. But he found that as he got closer to these rocks that were shining this purple hue, he was able to think again, and suddenly he was inside. What a wondrous place this was. There was this yellow glow, this golden hue, and as he got deeper inside the cave, he realized it was made of these gold glistening rocks all over the place. But the area that was the brightest is what drew his attention, and as he got closer to it, he saw a hole in the ground. He looked into the hole, and what he saw amazed him. Bjorn's eyes went wide, and he could see the beginning of time, past and the present. Somehow he couldn't understand all of this, but he knew what it was, and a voice spoke to him. "Welcome, Bjorn." Bjorn spoke without saying a word. He told the voice, "This has been so amazing, but I really want to go back home. I want my mom. I want to see my brothers. I'm starting to forget what they look like. And I don't know why, because I can remember everything, things that I've never seen before, but somehow I'm forgetting them." The voice suddenly sounded like the voice of his father, and it told him, "Bjorn, you can't go back. He wanted to know why. He was able to do anything he wanted to, go anywhere. So why couldn't he just go back? He could go into this cave, he could go into space, he could go through the galaxies, but the one place he really wants to be, he can't go there? That doesn't seem very fair. And that's when the voice showed him through the portal. Bjorn, your life is over. At that experience, anyway. You've experienced it. It's time for you to choose another adventure. Bjorn just looked at his body, his broken body lying on the ground, as the brothers, that were also crying over him, led their mother to the area where his fallen body was. He watched as his mother curled up next to him and cried and howled over his body. He watched her mourn. He watched her grow old and have several more litters of puppies with some other feral dogs. He watched himself as a child with his brothers. He even watched himself watching himself currently as he watched himself watching himself. It was a never-ending loop. Still, Bjorn knew there was time. The voice spoke again. Bjorn, you can't go back into your body because that body doesn't exist anymore, at least not for you. Bjorn says it hasn't been that long. I just got here. And the voice said, no, Bjorn, you've been here. Maybe what feels like to you for a day or 2 days, but your body has been gone for over 600 million years. You can see the past and the present, but you can never go back. That lifetime, that timeline, and that galaxy doesn't even exist anymore. Bjorn was saddened by this. He could look freely back over the lives of his descendants all at once, but could never go back there and live. He could never see his mom again. She seemed so close, but yet so far. Bjorn was despondent, and he had to make peace with the fact that he would never see his family again, that he would never get to live in that experience again. He played back what had happened, how he faced off against that bear as his brothers looked on and mourned over him. He looked and cried as his brothers had curled up over his body trying to wake him up, saying how sorry they were for tricking him and that was all their fault and they wanted nothing more than to have their brother back and they were so sorry. They cried so hard and so long. They licked him furiously, trying to keep him warm and revive him. He'd never seen his brothers act that way when he was alive, but it's all he needed to see. His brothers did accept him. They did love him. Seeing that, Bjorn felt a sense of closure and peace, and he asked the voice, okay, well, what about my father? If I'm here, since my experience is over, can I see my father? I know he's gone too, and I can feel that he's been here. But the voice replies, saying that his father has already chosen his new adventure. In truth, his father had already been on millions of adventures after having left that experience. Bjorn could still not fathom the time scale and the quantity of things that happened in this realm. He didn't really know how to quantify it or how to describe it. It was ineffable. It's time to choose your next adventure, Bjorn. Bjorn kind of thought this was his adventure, but he said, you know what? Fine. I'm okay with this. I'm so happy I got to live that life and get to know my family. Bjorn suddenly thought of himself as a large wolf with wings. He spread them high and soared out of the cave into the atmosphere of the planet. And over the course of millions upon billions of years, Bjorn had many adventures. But after those many adventures, Bjorn found himself looking at something particular. A dark dot outside of the timelines he's been to. What could be there? It's time for his next adventure.